Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone from the OECD Paris. So I'm the head of Science Technology Policy Division here at OECD, and I'm here with David Wyckoff, who is responsible for the work on bio, nano, and converging technologies working party, the BNCT, and he's also the person who developed the program for this fantastic conference. So over these 2 days, I hope you enjoy the conference. And over these 2 days, we heard about the role of emerging technologies can play to address global challenges, in particular to respond to the urgent call of climate. Many of these technologies are not there yet, or there's not a market for them yet. And we also heard that technology governance needs to keep pace with development of new technologies. And that to do so, we need to engage in participatory processes. Today, we also heard some of the challenges and opportunities brought about by specific technologies, neurotechnology, carbon management technologies, and collaborative mechanisms to address unmet medical needs. We had also a brilliant panel on the use of strategic foresight as an engagement tool to bring different stakeholders together and create new common space for thinking about the future. And then last but not least, we just heard panel 4 on the tools that governments and stakeholders in the system have to address these challenges. So we come to the end of this conference, and we have 3 guests. So the first one is Françoise Roure from the Ministry of Economy and Finance in France. And she's also the chair of our working party on nanobio and converging technologies. And then we have Yongsuk Jang from CSTP, which is the Science and Technology Policy Institute in Korea, and also the chairman of the OECD Committee for Scientific and Technological Policy. And last, we have Andrew Wyckoff, our Director for Science, Technology and Innovation at OECD. And you have just heard him speaking in the last panel 4 on tools of upstream technology. So, I mean, from my perspective, of course, this was a great conference, mainly because it engaged a diversity of stakeholders. And again, kudos to David and the team for setting it up. But I'd like to hear from you 3. So what are your 2-3 main takeaways from these 2 days? Françoise, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much for the floor. I'll be brief. There have been amazing and inspiring outcomes from this today's event, and the BNCT has been dedicating its energy for almost 2 years now to design it, and those outcomes actually will power its future program of work. Technology has already changed the society in an intellectual way. Now publics are aware of how science, technology, and innovation affect interest and value. SDGs 1 Health, 0 Net Zero is the beginning of global agenda synchronization from policymaker perspective. But it comes to a cost. The deep understanding of what converging technologies means. Not utopia, not dystopia, but somewhere in between as a strong lever to ensure a bio-resilient and desirable future. I'd like to present some BNCT perspective in those concluding remarks. The first one is about the problem of the governance gaps. Beyond the sporadic focus, which has been mentioned by Andrew Wyckoff on specific technologies, a multilateral, multi-stakeholders sense of urgency to address governance gaps coming from an urging, converging, and enabling technology has been confirmed by this event. And it should be answered in order to address the daunting challenges societies face in systemic, long-lasting crises. We've talked about the G7 and the G20. Within OECD itself, there are synergies that can be deployed with the IEA, AEN, CSTP, the Gov department, etc., etc. Second takeaway I would like to say is about a culture of convergence. A culture of convergence still is an unmet need to deliver converging technologies' full potential as regards resilience. For this, to addressing government's deficit, the one recommendation that emerged from these conferences to invest hugely and urgently in policymakers' literacy in emerging technologies. and beyond policymakers to invest in a culture of convergence among all stakeholders, which means capacity building. The toolbox here is to educate the public with adequate training resources, paving the way to relevant, productive dialogue on the future technologies. Otherwise, without the deployment of a culture of technological convergence, the ongoing intergovernmental conversation about good governance of disruptive technologies in and for societies could fail in setting the right standards. There are barriers in order to develop this culture of convergence. I would like to mention only two. The first one is about a huge sense of complexity in addressing technological convergence, because professionals and the market, entrepreneurs, as well as finance analysis, get out of their comfort zone when addressing businesses out of technological silos, in particular when innovations aiming at safeguarding common pool resources and health equity are at stake and require collaboration ahead of competition. And there are solutions for that, for instance, facilitating IP mix solutions, platforms, etc. The second barrier against the deployment of a culture of convergence is a certain idea of what academic excellence means in the 21st century, struggling to keep pure scientific discipline at the top of STA agendas, and doing so may be denying the knowledge potential of crisscrossed, intertwined scientific disciplines. And from this point of view, I would like to mention specific areas like synthetic biology, cyber, physical, and societal systems, and so on, which illustrates the converging technologies aspect. The key here to solve the tensions, contradictions, or even trade-offs in fixing the governance gaps is the global as well as local preparedness, which has been mentioned. The preparedness by Yuko Harayama in particular. Preparedness requires a huge investment in the culture of convergence as a prerequisite to foster the societal co-production and adoption of emerging converging technologies. The BNCT Working Party is ready to support anticipation in technology disruptions as a pillar of the strategic intelligence approach in junction with the CSTP shift towards foresight. That's important. And indeed, the BNCT cannot substitute to what has been called a bunch of ministers in charge of the future. This was a proposal in the introductory remarks of the event. But the BNCT, I think, is ideally placed within the OECD to imagine, design, and propose good, converging technology governance standards, tools, and mechanisms, and I will cite only one, which is, for instance, an OECD joint technology assessment methodology, maybe including next generation of risks and opportunities, rooted on shared values and deploying a concept of dynamic governance continuum. So we will see if this will be part of the agenda, but this is what I could offer in order to have more precise proposal for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Françoise. Thank you for your takeaways and giving the BNCT perspective. So next, Yongsuk, what about the perspective of our Committee of Scientific and Technological Policy? What are your 3 key takeaways?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have to express my sincere appreciation to all speakers and panelists for their excellent and rich discussion. I really enjoyed it, so thank you so much. Since the discussion was so rich, my note was so messy, and it is very much hard to pick up the 3 takeaways, but let me try. Here are 3 takeaways I picked up, mainly from the perspective of CSTP, Committee on Scientific and Technological Policy. First, I would like to pick up the importance of the long-term and continuing investment on science technology. Well, the current pandemic proves that countries who had built scientific and technological capability over time have better resilience and agility of action. So we need to continue encouraging governments to invest in science and technology to address current and future grand challenges in partnership with private sector. For that, we need to build a long-term vision on the role of science technology for our more inclusive and sustainable future societies. We also need to take a multidisciplinary and a whole of government approach, including a wide range of policies on education, research, digital connectivity, and even space and oceans. Mission-oriented innovation might be effective tool for enabling such a multidisciplinary and whole-of-government approach, as well as for providing career directionality of STI and rapid deployment of technologies coming from scientific discovery. Second, I'd like to pick up the usefulness of policy experimentation, which could increase agility in our STI policy making. As my dear colleague Richard Johnson suggested earlier, we can create real-world laboratories by extending the tools at our disposal for anticipatory governance of technologies. Also, in order to be able to govern technologies, STI policymakers need to improve knowledge of emerging technologies. Last but not least, wider citizen engagement is indispensable. To govern technology upstream and effectively address global challenges and transition needs, it is necessary to build public trust in science technology. And for that, policymakers need to engage on a real dialogue between citizens and actors in the STI system. Without such engagement, government won't be able to gather the political support needed for progress on ambitious STI agendas. Broader citizen engagement is also essential to mitigate the social dislocation or inequality that transition always brings to some extent. For instance, workers need to be informed of forthcoming changes that the transition brings about, and policies need to be developed to mitigate possible hardship of workers. Co-creation of innovation, our committee is currently working on, is a part of citizen engagement. For effective co-creation of innovation, society can be brought in more directly in the design of the STI programs and policies. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yongsuk. So now we go to Andrew Wyckoff for the works for OECD and STI perspective.
Thank you, Alessandra, and let me extend the congratulations to colleagues for a great 2 days and forewarn them that they've got a lot of homework now, I think. I'm happy to have spoke after 2 representatives of our member countries because it's really up to them to tell us which direction to go into, and I look forward to taking this back to the working party and the committee to get a good direction. But from my perspective, there's a couple things. I want to echo some of the things that have been said by Françoise and Yongsuk. I think there's a real need to build trust amongst stakeholders. It means everyone's there with the same knowledge and skills and capabilities. And I think it's a bit asymmetrical at the moment. And that means really, I think, particularly on the policymaker side, making them aware, and that was Françoise's point. I think there's also a general point of some of these issues cut across different communities, both different ministries, which we know that can be hard, but also stakeholder groups, some of whom, again, come with different levels of sophistication. In London last week, the notion of a tech Sherpa for each government was floated. And I think that's an interesting idea. One person that would be play an ombudsman role across governments to try to adjudicate between different sectors. But in terms of specific work for us, and some of my takeaways is I'm going to be scratching my head for a while on the temporal dimension of this. We were reminded that the linear model really is not a good model, but that the whole idea of anticipatory suggests a linear notion. And so how to square that circle, I think is an interesting one. I think there's technologies differ a lot by sectors and so forth. As we heard this afternoon, the health sector has always had a tradition, I think, of being much more anticipatory, clinical trials in these things, why other sectors, particularly the digital sector, doesn't have that tradition. Matter of fact, we allow people to ship software with known flaws in it, and there seems to be no real recourse there. And so it's a traditionally quite different areas. And I think we need to come and think about that. And then my last question about the temporals that I'll be thinking about is just, what constitutes the future? I said this last session, how far forward do we need to get to really be anticipatory, to get all those stakeholders together and get that community working together to shape a technology? And would we have known, if you get far enough ahead? I think when we started splitting atoms, we knew quite literally we were playing with fire. And there was a big effort right at the outset to look at the ethical and responsible dimensions of that. On the other hand, last week in London, so much of the talk was about social media. And again, as I said, it's not clear to me that any of us in 2003 to 2005 would have seen the trajectory that technology has taken. So I think a little bit of humility is in order, but also lessons from the past.
Thank you, Andy. In the first session, we also heard the proposal of having a minister of the future in every country. So, David, your turn to ask a question.
Great. Thanks, Alessandra, and thanks to my distinguished colleagues and panelists today and for the whole day. I thought it was a wonderful day, and the 2 days have really exceeded expectations in every way. So thank you for the ways that you've made that possible. And I also, just hearing about laboratories, I think that's a really nice analogy. And I think there are many laboratories that we've heard about today, and the results from those laboratories have been brought to our forum here. And so I think it's a way of saying there should be an iterative process of experimentation, of learning, and further experimentation. And in its ideal form, that's part of what we do at the OECD, and hopefully do in a productive way. I do want to pose maybe the predictable question, which is to think about, what are the next steps exactly, or perhaps not precisely, but where should we be moving, both as a global community, as societies, but also as an institution here at the OECD. We've learned a lot. It's been a dense couple of days. We're looking to you, the leaders of our groups, to just put a couple of ideas together to see what you're thinking about. So if I could ask again in the same order, Françoise.
Yes, very quickly. In France, in fact, the next step has been to invest in incentives for the future. That is to say that we cannot bet on inclusivity as such, as policymakers. We have to act. And 1% of the national research agency now is dedicated to financing long-lasting dialogues between science, research, and societies. There is a program to reinforce the networks, the local networks in charge of the diffusion of its main goal, of inclusivity to show up the benefits of science for society and to solve at the local level, local problems as well. So it's a matter of incentives and not only a matter of game.
Yongsuk?
Yes. Well, now I think we should start with identifying right actors and communities for co-development of such an agenda for technology for good. With right actors and communities, technology governance can take the necessary transdisciplinary whole of government and multi-stakeholder approaches. For that, CSTP is currently undertaking a series of policy dialogue on STI for transitions, for trying to engage communities beyond STI. When it comes to international cooperation, which was most frequently mentioned last 2 days, CSTP needs to help identify and encourage mutual beneficial win-win opportunities for international cooperation. In fact, our community has developed many important standards on international STI cooperation, including Daejeon Declaration in 2015 and this year's revision of recommendation on science technology international cooperation. We should not stop here, but go forward implementation of such standards and pay greater attention to opportunities for international cooperation in technology policy for good. We can also leverage on the great work done by our working party on bio, nano, and converging technology, which is chaired by my dear colleague, Françoise Roure. BNCT recently developed a recommendation on responsible innovation in neurotechnology. This recommendation can be a good source of further principles for anticipatory governance of emerging technology. This conference is also an important milestone for our work in this area, so that we need to take stock of this outcome carefully and reflect them to our brand plan of S&T Policy 2025. Lastly, we need to make more room for policy experimentation to increase agility in STI policy making. For that, we need to develop a strategic intelligence around the portfolio of technologies that can help address today's and tomorrow's challenges. And more importantly, we need to share best practices on how to achieve wider engagement and co-creation around the technology developed for good. We could leverage on our current work and excellent knowledge infrastructure such as a STEP compass to develop, for instance, observatory of emerging technologies and anticipatory governance practices. Thank you.
Andy Wyckoff.
So thanks, David. I think the first thing we need to do is maybe seize on the sense of urgency that you've heard from Françoise and others. And again, I heard it last week. Margaret, Vice President of the European Union, Margaret Vestager, talked about 80% and get it done now, or go for 100% and never do it. And I think there's something to that. And I think this is, we should move forward. I think a first step is just to harvest and digest the incredible number of insights you've gotten over the last couple of days. This will take a little while, but and this I think will help us figure out how to go forward. Again, it's not up to me, David, but I would encourage the Committee on Scientific and Technological Policy to think about convoking an expert advisory group to maybe follow up on this and to direct that committee on how they think, and the working party for that matter, on how they should go forward on issues such as horizon scanning, which I said we do, but maybe it hasn't been as systematic, as well as I think taking stock of the current efforts at anticipatory tech governance, what has worked well, and where can we learn lessons. And this is kind of the classic secretariat approach. We start with collecting everything we can know about a topic to well inform us for going forward. And so with that, I think that's my two suggestions I would make to Françoise and Yongsuk, and see what they take with it going forward.
Okay, so thank you so much for this round, and thank you for thinking on your feet, listening to the conference and getting out these takeaways and future directions. Just some statistics. So we had over 1,400 registered participants, but obviously then those who actually tuned in were many less. So we were more than 600 people actually coming and listening in. But that means that the others who have registered will have the opportunity to play the video recordings. The ones from yesterday are already online, and the one for today, they will be online tomorrow. So you can play and replay and listen carefully to every word that has been said. But before ending, I would like to call on all, apart from David, who has been the main person behind the program, we had a large team, and I would like to call them on if they can switch on their video. And I'd like to thank them all, and particularly Laura Craigling, who has been working together with David on the program. And Laura, she is expecting a baby, so she is almost delivering. We were afraid she would deliver on the day of the conference. And obviously Denise also works on the program, and Philip, Jim and Herman, who I don't see here, they worked on preparing panels. I went dark, my light went off in the office. And we have all the others, Andres, Christina, Celia, who I don't see, Stella, Kulani, who saved us with the InWink platform. And I hope I didn't forget anyone. David, did I forget anyone?
I think that's right. And can I just throw in my own thank you to my team that really pulled together. And I think we did a good job. I think we put forward some ideas about technology for good, and we'll have to take it to the next steps. But Alessandra, why don't you close out?
I close it here, and obviously we continue the conversation, and please disseminate the conference website so your colleagues can also benefit from all the ideas that were generated in this conference. And we hope to continue the conversation with many of the stakeholders that participated for our future work at OECD. So thank you again for participating and contributing.
Congratulations.